Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh. This is video number 52 of the City and Guilds course. In fact, this is the level 3 part. And today we're going to be beginning talking about estimating quantities and pricing work for construction. Now, there are a number of building documents, planning documents that need to be produced in order for this estimating of quantities and pricing for work to be achieved. The first one is what's called a schedule. Now, a schedule is a list. It's a list of all of the items that are put into a building project, and I'm going to show you an example of what a schedule might look like. We have schedules for doors, we have schedules for windows, we have schedules for reinforcement, and on the schedule it might specify the quantity, it might specify the color. For example, if it's doors or handles, it might say whether they're silver or whether they're gold or whether they're white or whether they're black or whether they're red. It might also indicate the dimensions. It might indicate the location of where the items are going to be eventually. It might even give installation details, and it might also detail the manufacturer, or even the British Standard number, or even a reference number. So these schedules then are very important. Let me give you an example that I've quickly put together of a schedule. Now, this particular schedule, as you can see, is a schedule for doors. It's a door schedule, and you can see it's a complex matrix, but you'll see here the reference. On a plan, it'll say on every opening, it'll say D2, D4, D5, D7, whatever it is, the particular door number. Every door and every opening will have a number. It'll be door 1, door 2, door 3. Next to that, it'll then give the size of the door, and you'll see that there's not a lot of variation, but there is a variation in door width or door height. And then it'll describe what lintel may be above that door. Sometimes it does that, not always, sometimes. Most of the time, it'll talk about the fire rating. Is it a fire door, 30-minute fire door? That is a door that can withhold fire for 30 minutes on the other side of the door. And on this one, it says yes, 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 no, no, yes. Now, there's some reason why door 5 and door 6 are not necessary for fire rating. It could be they're just a cupboard door. If it's a cupboard door, then nobody lives inside the cupboard, so therefore we don't need to worry about it being fireproof. And on some of them, it'll say door number 1 is a self-closing door. Yes. Door number 2 doesn't have to be a self-closing door. Door 3 does, door 4 does. Door 5 and 6, and 7, they don't have to be self-closing doors. And then there's other details. It may talk about the handing. It may talk about the handles. It may say whether it's a D handle or whether it's a latch handle. All the details necessary to specify what's on a door will be included. So, for example, does it have a window in it? Does it have a kick plate at the bottom? What sort of handle? Is it electronic or is it not electronic? You know, there's a great variety of information that's necessary on a door. So that's what's called a schedule. Now, the next item of paperwork that's very important is what's called a Bill of Quantities. A Bill of Quantities is produced generally by an estimator or by the quantity surveyor, and it's a complicated list. Usually it goes into many hundreds of pages and will eventually be a book in its own right. Let me give you a very, very brief sample of what a bill of quantities may look like. I'm not sure if you can see all of that. It's in fine print, but you'll see that it's a list, and it'll have certain key features on the left-hand side. It'll also have, it says ground floor, and it's got certain calculations, you know, reinforced concrete at 1.49. I'm not sure what all that means, but a quantity surveyor or a concreter would know. And then it's multiplied by a certain so many meters per cubic meter, and then it's mesh galvanized steel not exceeding, and it's very technical. Okay, but the important thing is that from this technical information, it's possible to come up with a specific price in the end. Now, there's different types of price. There is what's called a preliminary price. This is the work necessary to begin establishing what the final price will be. Then there is what's called the preambles. And the preambles are statements which express the agenda or describe the accompanying documents. And therefore, the preambles in the Bill of Quantities refers to the tender letter that gives a description of the materials required for construction. It gives quantity, type, characteristics of the materials required. Then we have what's called a provisional sum. So this refers to the bill of work that is undefined. There may be some work in here in the bill of quantities that's pretty difficult to fix at a particular rate. Okay, so it would be an estimate. It's not a fixed sum, but it would be an estimate. Then there will finally be what's called the prime cost. Now, the prime cost covers all work undertaken by nominated subcontractors and by nominated suppliers and by statutory undertakings. And they are based on quotations for items of work which can be populated into the quote. So this is the Bill of Quantities. Okay, quite a different thing to the schedule. The schedule specifies every item going into the building. The Bill of Quantities will list up how much of that material there is and what the price is going to be for materials and for labor. And then we have another document, if that's not enough. We then have another document, and it's called a specification. Let me see if I can turn this page. Now, a specification, I don't know whether you can quite see this. It's quite fine print. I'm so sorry about that. You might be able to make it bigger. A specification is a document which specifies the quality, okay, of the materials that are going to be provided and also the quality of the labor that's going to be provided. So it's essential information to the contractor about the materials, their finish, the workmanship required to construct the building. The specification gives information if it is noted on the drawing that would clutter it and make it unreadable. An example of this type of specification is here. And here we're talking about the external wall cavity. It talks about the type of, and it talks about a cavity of a certain size. It talks about the masonry units, well, we call them bricks or blocks. And it tells us about the British standard number or what quality and details, or maybe what color they should be or what finish they should be. And it specifies even the mortar, what British standard working to and what mix it would be and what is fit for purpose and what loading it might be able to bear. Even the mortar itself will have a strength to it. So this is specifying in great detail. It's very important that any contractor doesn't give a quote until they know exactly what they're quoting for. It's no good you giving a quote for one thing and somebody else giving a quote for inferior materials. They then can be cheaper. We need to have quotations that come in which are for the same material and the same standard of workmanship. Okay, so this is the specification. So we've already described at least 3 different types of important information, paperwork, that enables the building to be planned. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is what I call the tender process. Now, the tender process has a number of stages to it. The first thing we need to notice is we need to notice what the labour rates are. Now, the labour rates will vary in different parts of the UK and in different parts of the world. So in London, the labour rate is higher. And in the rural areas and in Wales and in far north of Scotland, the rates will be different. The employment rate, the amount that people charge. Now, don't think that it will automatically be a lower rate in the rural areas. Okay, it might actually be a higher rate. And the reason for that is because they may have to travel further to work. okay? And it also might be harder to get the labor that you need, which means if it's harder to find the labor, then the rate will increase slightly. But in different parts of the country, the labor rate fluctuates up and down. The second thing we notice is overheads. Now, it isn't just labor that we're paying for on a quotation. We're paying also for the facilities that the craftsman will need in constructing the build. So, for example, they will need to have a vehicle to long are the days when you turn up on a bicycle or when you walk to work. These builders are highly sophisticated people, very intelligent. They will need to have transport. They will need to have tools. They will need to have an accountant. Okay, they may, if they're a larger firm, need to have secretary. They may need to have a managing director or a foreman. Now, the managing director doesn't do work, but he manages all the work, and his wages have to be paid for in the tender process. So that's the next thing. And of course, there's gas, there's phone, there's insurance, there's plant hire, and there's equipment that have to be taken into account. The next item on the tender process is the contingencies. Now, contingencies mean all those things that are unforeseen. Could be that when you're digging to put a foundation in, you discover a well, or you might discover a gas pipe, or you might even break the gas pipe and there's a gas leak, or you might break a water pipe and suddenly an area becomes flooded. Now, these are things that were never foreseen by you or by the client or by anybody else, but they still have to be paid for. And sometimes that's very expensive. Sometimes it's the responsibility of the water board to fix any pipes that break. But sometimes the water board will say, no, this is going to cost £100,000. We need the contractor to pay for it out of his insurance. And so there's sometimes disputes in building work about contingencies. But contingencies need to be taken into account in a building, and they can be expensive. The next thing is profit. Now, nobody works just for wages alone. You know, when you go to buy a loaf of bread, you don't just pay, £1.20 for a loaf and the shop buy it at £1.20. They might buy it at 20p and sell it for £1.20, because not only have they got all of the overheads, they've got to pay for the electric so people can walk in and out of the store. They've got to pay for the labor of the people that sell you the goods. They've got to pay for the contingencies, but they've also got to make a profit. When you go to Tesco or Morrison's to buy something, they make profit. They buy it at a certain rate. They put all of the expense into presenting it to you. They put all the expense into providing staff for you to pay for it, but also the shareholders of the company will want to see a profit. Okay, and that profit may not be very great. It may be just 5% or 10% or 12%. Doesn't matter what it is. The important thing is there's extra money to be found on the overall price. The next thing is VAT. Now, value added tax is something that was introduced many years ago, and when you buy goods, you pay an extra premium of VAT to the government just for the privilege of buying it. Okay? Now, some VAT can be claimed back and some VAT can't. And so that's why this needs an accountant to be able to work out exactly what VAT should be paid and what VAT doesn't need to be paid. Okay? Now, if that doesn't sound complicated enough, I can tell you that working out a tender process can be complicated. Okay? This is why, as a carpenter, you'll need to have the help of people that will enable you to come up with a very good price, making sure that it's not too high or too low, making sure that you can afford to pay for everything that needs to be paid for. It's very important that you come out of it with some profit and that you come out of it with enough money to pay the VAT man. These are all very, very important things. Now, I could go into the complexities of calculating a unit rate. I could do that. It's a very simple thing, really. It's about counting the material. Say, for example, you're talking about fitting doors. So just a simple door may cost a certain amount of money, but a different type of door may cost a different amount of money, but the amount of work necessary to hang both doors may be identical. So you will have a labor rate for hanging a particular door. And I have a book of my own at home, which is my particular rates for what I charge for hanging a door, how long it takes. But in that little book of mine, I talk about the different types of door. Is it a heavy door? Is it a very light door? Is it internal? Is it a fire door? Is it wide, extra wide, or is it quite a narrow door? Each of the doors take a certain amount of labor, a certain amount of time to enable you to hang them. And of course, it depends on whether there's 2 hinges or 3 hinges or 4 hinges. It depends on what type of lock is going to go on the door. All of these things affect the time and affect the labor rate. Okay, and then when you add all the labor rate to the materials, I mean, how much is the door going to cost? How much are the hinges going to cost? How much are the screws going to cost? How much will the lock cost? How much will the glass cost? Do you know what? There's a lot of things to think about when you're pricing. But what you will finally do when you've included the labor and you've included the materials, okay, you come up with what's called the unit rate. One door costs X amount of money to be able to hang it. And with experience and with time, you'll be able to develop quite an accurate way of knowing how much you should be charging. Now, there are other ways of estimating costs. You might buy the SPONS book, SPONS, SPONS book, or you might buy Laxton's Building Price book, okay, the NRM book. And all of these books will allow you to be able to make very accurate predictions as to, if you go into the SPONS book, I've got a copy with me at the minute, it's a very, very thick book. It's measured by inches wide. And in that book, it'll tell you the cost of every single thing in the building industry. It'll tell you per meter squared the cost of building a nursery school. It'll tell you the cost per meter square of building an aircraft runway. It'll tell you the cost of one piece of skirting 1 meter long being fixed to a wall. It'll tell you the cost of everything. Now, these books are quite expensive. You know, you'll be spending quite a bit of money. And in the book, it'll tell you about the country variations, the variations in price across the different parts of the country geographically. So these books are exceptionally worthwhile having. Now, a lot of people ask, what's the difference between a quotation and an estimate? Sometimes you'll see letters coming in and there'll be an estimate of work. Other times it'll be a quotation. Now, the difference between the two is this. An estimate is the best guess of what it's likely to cost. Just remember that. An estimate is only estimated. However, a quotation is a particular statement being made about what the supplier is definitely going to be charging for a particular job. Okay, so there's a difference in the two. An estimate is a best guess, and the quotation is an accurate prediction as to what everything will cost. Just remember that in all of these things, there is a thing called a variation order. Whenever I'm doing work, I always give the price to the customer. The price is just a description of everything that I'm proposing to do. And then there is one single fixed price. I don't tell them how I worked it out. I don't tell them what profit I'm charging. I don't tell them what VAT I'm having to pay. I don't tell them anything like that. I just tell them exactly what the final price will be. But then at the bottom, it will say that this price is for a certain limited time, and I'll specify maybe 3 months or 3 weeks or whatever specification I want to give. And it will always say that this is subject to a variation order. Now, a variation order is just another document, and normally when I'm giving the price, I give them a blank variation order at the same time. And generally people don't know what that means, and they'll say, what's this? And you'll say, well, a variation order is when you want to order me to do some work that was never anticipated at the beginning. It was never on the specification. It was never on the program of works. It's something that's happened, something that needs to be done that both you and I have never envisaged. No one ever thought that that would need to be done. So this means that there's extra work to be done, which means it's an extra cost. So on the variation order, it will all be filled in and the work will be described, and there'll be a price given on the variation order. And then both the customer and the laborer, the worker, the carpenter, will sign to say that they agree to this particular price. Now this guards two things. It guards the customer from having an increase in price without being agreed, and it also protects the carpenter or the builder from not being paid for extra work that was requested to be done. Okay, so the variation order then is very important. And then lastly, when doing working out of pricing for people, it's very important at a very early stage to begin sourcing the suppliers. Now, sometimes there are preferred suppliers. Sometimes there are people that you've worked with in the past who are preferred people, the people that you would like to be going to, and you'd need to contact them and say, listen, I'm pricing for some work. Maybe I'm pricing for a load of windows to be done. And I want to know, will you be able to be my preferred supplier? Now, a lot of people like to be preferred suppliers, but ask them, are you prepared to be able to do this work? How much time would you need before commencing the work? What pricing would you be able to give me for this work? And at other times, you may not have a preferred supplier. You just go along to the nearest builder's merchant or the nearest supplier, or maybe even the nearest timber importer, and say, look, I'm going to be needing joists, I'm going to be needing material, timber, skirting, architrave, doors, whatever it might be. I'm going to be needing material to be able to do a job, and I need to know the price. What is the price that you're going to be able to supply me at? And also, are you going to be still in business in a few months' time? And can I rely upon you to be my supplier? Okay, now then, that's quite a lot to think about, isn't it? But there are more things to think about, and we'll talk about them on the next video. Okay, right, have a great day. We look forward to catching up with you next time. Bye for now.